tutorial video. But this video is just going to go over the very basics of modding your Switch and using the mods that I create. Because this is a static video that can't be updated in the future, I'm going to direct you to switch.homebrew.guide for all of the very basics. This website has consistently updated information that you can continue to rely on, as opposed to just hoping that this video will remain accurate in the future. This is a lot to take in, but if you're a complete noob to the Switch scene, you should seriously consider reading all of it. That goes for you too, audience. The first thing that you need to know is that not every Nintendo Switch is made equal. There are quite a few Nintendo Switches that just aren't able to be modded at all. Currently, all Nintendo Switches sold before July 2018 can run custom firmware. Switches sold after this point may only be exploitable if they are on firmware 4.1.0. There's also a website where you can very quickly check to see if your Nintendo Switch is vulnerable to mods. ismyswitchpatched.com. I just entered one of my Nintendo Switch's serial numbers into here, and it said, your console's not patched, hooray! So that's a very good resource for figuring out if you're able to do mods at all. Even if you go through this guide and your Switch ends up being compatible, you still have to be concerned with being banned. Nintendo is taking no chances with the Nintendo Switch. Permanent console bans can and often do happen. This guide will take many precautions to avoid being banned, but this site assumes no responsibility if your system is banned. Everybody says that your Switch will be banned, including me. I say it too, like you'll be banned, but people don't really know what that means. I've had people ask me, what does it even mean to be banned? Like, what does that do? It means that your Nintendo Switch unit is completely barred from all of Nintendo's online services. Things like firmware updates, title updates, eShop. You can't even use YouTube or Hulu on a banned Switch. And you're completely unable to have any sort of Nintendo Switch online on that console ever again. The reason that Nintendo is so strict about this is because they know how problematic the 3DS and Wii U modding scene was. They didn't hand out bans generously enough, which led to a lot of online cheating. I've had a modded 3DS for about 6 or 7 years, and I've never been banned. When I got a modded Switch, I was banned within the first 24 hours. I actually prefer it this way. I would really rather Super Smash Bros. And Splatoon 2 stay hacker-free, or at least 99% hacker-free. When I say that I was banned in the first 24 hours, I wasn't just being stupid, it was intentional. I knew exactly what I was doing. I got into the Switch modding scene day one. I was there very, very early. And at the time, the best course of action was to have 2 Nintendo Switches. This Nintendo Switch with a Phantom Joy-Con is my completely unmodded Switch. It's totally legit, no mods at all. I play online with this thing. And this one is my modded Switch. This is the one that I do all kinds of fun stuff with. It's the thing that's enabled me to make this channel, but it is very banned. If you're careful, you can get away with only using one Nintendo Switch and having MUMMC. I'm not going to go into great detail on MUMMC because there's already an excellent guide on how exactly to do it and what it all means and everything step by step on switch.homebrew.guide. But very basically, MUMMC is essentially a copy of everything that your Nintendo Switch needs to run entirely virtualized within your microSD card. This allows people to do modding stuff in the copy of the Nintendo Switch's firmware that lives on the microSD card, and then you can still go back to normal just by not booting into that environment. I've never used it, I've never had a need to use it, but if you only have one Nintendo Switch and you want to have your cake and eat it too, that's a slightly safer way to do it. I want to talk about payload injectors real quick. A payload injector is a physical tool. You don't have to buy one, you can just use a computer to do it. It's completely optional, but it's very convenient. So just to flex how early I was in the Nintendo Switch modding scene, I have one of these. This is an SX Pro made by Team Executor. It was the first of its kind, and I forgive it for that, but don't buy this now. There are so many better options than this. But just for the sake of example, I'm going to show what the SX Pro is and how it worked, and better alternatives to it. This right here is the SX Pro Payload Injector, and this right here is the Rcm Jig. The Rcm Jig is responsible for grounding pin 10 on the right Joy-Con rail. This puts the Switch into RCM mode, which allows for payload injection. The payload that is being injected by the payload injector is the code that's responsible for booting the Nintendo Switch into custom firmware mode, which allows you to do fun stuff. You don't need an Rcm Jig to get into RCM. The first time that I ever got into RCM, I used a copper wire that was very thin, and I grounded point 10 manually by touching the wires in 2 different places. Don't do that, that's very unsafe. But I did do it. You must understand, I was so early in the Nintendo Switch scene. None of these tools existed. Get a Jig, they're cheap, they're easy to come by. You can check eBay, AliExpress, they're all over the place. Aside from the SX Pro just having outdated hardware at this point, Team Executor has always been very piracy focused, and they've always had some very weird, shady business practices, and they're in the process of getting sued by Nintendo right now, for good reason. sadly. My payload injector of choice for a long time has been the Dragon Injector. I love this thing, I think it's awesome. It's fully open source, and it's small enough that it fits inside of the Nintendo Switch's cartridge slot. Even if your project is totally open source, not piracy focused, and not for profit, you will still get cease and desist from Nintendo. So, can we get an F in the chat for our fallen comrades? If you can't get an injector from Team Executor because they're getting sued, if you can't get it from Dragon Injector because they're getting sued, who do you get it from? You get it from eBay. They have a bunch of crappy generic ones like the RCM loader. Those work just fine and they're cheap. So yeah, just get one from there, I guess. I don't know. One last thing, and then we can get into the Animal Crossing. I promise I'll get there. I just need to explain how Atmosphere works. Atmosphere is the definitive custom firmware for Nintendo Switch. A custom firmware is a set of patches that make changes to your Switch's firmware. Things like removing signature checks to allow you to run unsigned code, like Homebrew, for example. One of these patches is a feature called Layered FS, or Layered File System. So here's how Layered FS works. So this right here is the ROM's file system. Imagine that this is where all of the game's files go. So this would be a game like Super Mario Odyssey, Animal Crossing New Horizons, stuff like that. Let's say that that game has a picture in it called stickman.png, and it's this absolutely stunning drawing of a stickman right here. This stickman lives inside of the game's cartridge. But let's say that I wanted this stickman to have a hat. I wanted him to be wearing a hat. So I take the file from the game and I draw a big red hat on him, right? So this stickman now has a hat. So I'm going to save this as stickman.png, and then I'm going to put this stickman.png with a hat into Layered FS. So the romfs stickman.png isn't even loaded, it's completely skipped because stickman.png in the Layered FS has priority, which means that the game will load stickman with a hat instead of stickman without a hat. Did that make any sense? Let's say your Switch is moddable, you've got Atmosphere installed, you're ready to rock and roll. So let's go over to patreon.com/clue. And people have been having problems with me saying, drop into your model folder as usual. People don't know what that means. Some people do, but some don't. So let's go ahead and download this file, right? This is the cleaned up barreled mod that I made. Go ahead and save that. Personally, I never take out my SD card. I use a sys module called sysftpd lite, which always runs in the background and it's very convenient. Just for the sake of simplicity though, I am going to be using my SD card for this. I'm just going to plug this into a micro SD adapter. This here is my modded Switch's micro SD card. Atmosphere, contents, and then it's going to be this number that I have up on screen right here. This is the game ID for Animal Crossing New Horizons. I will also put this in the description below so that you can copy and paste it. Go in there, you go into the romfs folder, and now I got a whole bunch of stuff in here because, you know, I make mods for this game. So this is the full path. Atmosphere, contents, this ID, romfs, and then model. So this right here is the full Animal Crossing New Horizons romfs. This is every single file in the entire game. And there are quite a few in here, as you can see, because there are 13,000 items just in this one folder, in which is split into 3 folders. And this is my Layered FS right here. So these items right here take priority over these right here, for example. I've placed the cleaned up barreled mod right here on my desktop, and then you can just go and drop it right in here, right into your Layered FS. Atmosphere should load it up just fine if everything was done right. I'm going to answer a few more frequently asked questions, and then I'll be done. Can people come to visit a modded town? No. If you have a modded town and you're not banned, it's only a matter of time. If you are banned, you can't use any online services or Nintendo Switch Online, so no, not possible. Can I create a custom character on a modded Switch and then trade them with somebody on a legit Switch and then they'll have the modded assets? No, that's absolutely ridiculous. All of the character mods are completely cosmetic and local to the unit that you're using them on. Even if you could trade cleaned up barreled with somebody, they would just receive regular barreled because all of the assets that make up cleaned up barreled are local to your SD card.
But Clue, I know a guy that has a hacked town and he's not banned. How do you explain that?
Well, it looks like their Nintendo Switch is a ticking time bomb, isn't it? You better get out of there while you still can, cause that thing's gonna blow.
But Clue, hacking the Switch is illegal. It's against the law to mod a Switch. By making this video, you are outing yourself as a criminal.
In the original 1998 proposed Digital Millennium Copyright Act, it criminalized circumventing DRM, even if that circumvention was not used to enable illegal activity. However, in October 2015, there was an exception made to the law which claimed that programs may circumvent DRM so long as it's in good faith and it does not violate any applicable laws. So no, modding your Switch is not illegal. If it was, I would be in big trouble, wouldn't I? Why would I make a video about it if it was illegal? That makes no sense. What are you talking about?